Tell me about this meeting, because it was kind of fascinating. It really wasn't about conversations around oil or the energy markets.
It was absolutely fascinating, especially if you had an opportunity to watch the press conference live. I think everything from the marble floors to the White House to whether or not Saudi Arabia is going to join the Abraham Accords was covered. What's interesting is the amount of money that Mohammed bin Salman is talking about potentially investing in the United States. And I think the big question on everyone's mind is, where are they getting this money from, given that oil prices are pretty low? And I think the answer really is you have to look at the Saudi investment fund, the PIF, because that's really where they have a lot of their investment dollars and ready to deploy. And it really, that fund is really independent of the price of a barrel of oil. So I think the question of whether Saudi can deliver this money, the answer is yes. But whether they actually will deliver on this is another question. And I do think that a lot of that money is probably earmarked for defense purchases, and that really depends on whether they do go through with this agreement to sell Saudi Arabia F-35s and other defense equipment that is somewhat controversial and hasn't necessarily been sold to Saudi Arabia previously.
Carol mentioned that you're the author of Saudi Inc., The History of Saudi Arabia and Aramco. And I wonder now how successful the Saudi Arabian government has been, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, of diversifying its economy away from oil. Has it been successful?
That is a really great question. And I think the answer is, if you're looking at and you're trying to say, have they achieved the goals that they set out to achieve when they announced their big plan to diversify from oil? The answer is no, they have not really achieved those goals. I think really a lot of those goals were not achievable goals. What they have done is they have introduced some very important changes that I think can certainly help make the Saudi economy more robust over time. We're talking about making it easier for foreigners to visit the country, both for tourism, but also to work, opening up the workspace for women, and important societal changes like that, I think in the long run will help diversify their economy. But if you're asking whether their economy is still very much dependent on the energy industry, the answer is yes. Aramco, on the other hand, has over the past 50 years, I would say, significantly diversified itself from simply an upstream company that sold a lot of crude oil to a very diverse energy company that has multiple revenue streams. So they're not just dependent on what the price of a barrel of oil is. They make a lot of oil products. They're getting into natural gas. They make money off of trading oil and in the financial sense. And so they're making a lot of money that is not dependent on whether the price of a barrel of oil is $60 or $80.
So I guess this relationship that we are seeing between the United States and Saudi Arabia, I feel like it's always been a bit of a frenemy kind of relationship between the two nations. Having said that, there's been times where it's been stronger, times when it has not. Is this the relationship going forward, in your view?
What's so interesting about the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia has a very different view of the relationship than the United States does. In the Saudi mind, the U.S. is a best friend, that they've always been so close, and they've cultivated an entire kind of aura and idea about this friendship. They think the U.S. is a huge ally. If you look at it from the U.S. perspective, Saudi Arabia is, at least it can be, a strategic partner, but Saudi Arabia would not be considered an ally to the United States the same way Great Britain or Canada might be considered an ally. And so I think that leads to very different opinions about what exactly is going to go on. So, whether or not, Saudi Arabia has a defense agreement, yes, traditionally we have had defense agreements, but from the U.S. perspective, that's not always so guaranteed. If it's beneficial to the U.S., then it will happen. But it's not necessarily a guarantee. It's not necessarily this allyship that the Saudis often perceive the relationship to be.
Well, it's interesting when you say Canada and the UK, and in particular Canada, I feel like, it looks almost a friendlier relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia than it certainly does between U.S. and Canada right now. I guess my question really, Ellen, is, are we laying the ground for whoever is in the White House next, be it Democrat or Republican, that this is the relationship, or could it change and get different depending, again, who is in the White House?
I think that there's always kind of a baseline, and you could see that when Trump was kind of fishing for a compliment from MBS, as oh well, he's the best president. They've had the best relationship with Trump, and MBS kind of answered that with, well, we've always had Democrat or Republican, we've always had good relations with presidents of the United States, and then he mentions Reagan as a particularly good one. So I think that MBS is certainly looking at this as he's got to lay the groundwork for his good relationships with presidents that are going to come after Trump, whereas Trump is seeing it as the here and now.
The military balance of power in the Middle East, the potential F-35s that Saudi Arabia could get as a result of making a deal with the United States. President Trump said he would approve selling the F-35 fighter jet to Saudi Arabia. I'm just wondering how that changes the balance of power when it comes to the militaries in the region, especially with regard to Israel, which for years has been a U.S. ally, and also what U.S. interest the U.S. would have an interest in selling F-35s apart from getting the revenue to a U.S. company.
Exactly. I do think from Trump's perspective, he thinks that the F-35s are the greatest airplane ever to be made. And so he loves that everybody wants them. And so it's more of an economic issue. I think from the Pentagon's perspective, they're looking at it as more of a strategic issue. Now, the UAE apparently got assurances they would be able to purchase these when they signed the Abraham Accords, and it was believed that this would also be a condition for Saudi Arabia. I think it's very, very clear now that Saudi Arabia is not going to join the Abraham Accords. They're not recognizing Israel unless there's an assured path towards a Palestinian state. I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. So I think we're kind of going to be at a standstill here. And if the Pentagon has severe concerns about it, I think it may not actually go through as much as Trump wants it to go through.